It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. I saw this report. Now, it's an older report back in August from the Treasury Department. And it said, something that I've said for a very long time. It's titled Labor Unions and the Middle Class, but their conclusion that strengthened unions have the potential to stem or reverse some of the negative trends that have faced the middle class since the 70s. Been saying that, well, for all 18 years of doing this little program. They point out that stagnant wages, deteriorating retirement benefits, decreased leisure time, all that stuff can be reversed. And that unions raise wages, they raise fringe benefits, and other things for members to do better. And here's the other part, talk about this as well. There's a spillover effect that leads to similar improvements for non-union workers. This is that rising tide thing that we've heard about with the boats. Maybe you heard this. This is when we do better, we do better. And I couldn't help as I was reading through this, and there's a lot. These reports are very dense. The gist, very simple though. Good jobs, better life. Goes back to what I've said a number of times about when I was a kid. Union job, better life. Something I learned very early on. We had a neighbor. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. We were where they put the socioeconomic ladder on top of. And I'd say all the time, look, you wouldn't know it, but when I was a kid, cupboards were bare a lot of the times. We were struggling. And that job that the neighbor got, working at Ford, a UAW job, at the time the gold standard of the American working class, their lives immediately got better. They had food at the end of the month. Their kids had bikes, better clothes. They got a secondhand car. Eventually, they moved up and out. They left the projects. And I remember as a kid going, how do we do that? And again, union job, better life. So when I had the opportunity to get a union job, when I was a young man, jumped at it. And as a 19-year-old starting to work in, and doing dock work and working for doing warehouse work, the wages gave me the opportunity to build a solid life. And the thing is I want that for everybody. But I was thinking about it today that, when I started working, this is back in the mid to late 80s, union density in this country was about 25%. That means that out of everybody working, a quarter of the workers had unions. And a quarter of the workers benefited from those unions by having raised standards and benefits. And I would argue the whole society did, because the 8-hour day was something that it was the norm. Granted, unions had fought, bled, and died for that right. They inculcated it in all of their contracts. And everybody benefited from it. The weekends, something else unions fought for, something else we took for granted, and benefited everyone. Union, non-union, didn't matter. But everyone knew somebody who was in a union. Everyone had a neighbor or a relative or a friend who was a union member. And they saw, hey, wow, that's a good job you got there. And that's been destroyed over the last 40 plus years. Conservative supply side voodoo Reaganomics brought us this. Desperation wage jobs, people struggling to make ends meet, and division. And I say all the time, if we're going to reunite this country, we've got to reunionize it. We've got to claw back some of the wealth that we create. And we've got to do it in a way that ensures that we all do better. The CEO all the way down to the person sweeping the floor. And look, that means everybody. But I was thinking about where we are today. I started off, it was 25% union density in this country. In the industry that I've spent, the mass of my working life, back then when I started was 85% unionized. I fast forward all these years later, and the reality is we're 6% in the private sector union density. The industry that I work in is about 10%. And wages have been stagnant and declining. Benefits have been disappearing. Working conditions have been getting worse across every industry. And there was a time when virtually every industry had a voice, had a representative. I talk about my grandparents. My grandmother worked as a cashier at a small department store in Cleveland, represented by Local 880 of the UFCW. My grandfather was a truck driver, Teamsters Local 407. They built lives that saw their children go on and lead productive lives. They retired with dignity. They spent their golden years together in their home without desperation, without poverty, without hunger. And I look to the future and you go, how do you rebuild this? And I say all the time, the way forward, the way to solve our problems is in the workplace, by grabbing some of the wealth that our labor creates and holding on to it. So when we come back, I'm going to talk to our good friend Hamilton Nolan. He's a labor reporter, and he's written a piece on what needs to happen to revive the labor movement, to reunite this country, and to bring us all back together. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. I want to hear your thoughts. Something I said got you thinking. Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Right back after this.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania, to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The best way to strengthen America's economy? How about investing in America's fastest growing industry? Clean energy. It means millions of jobs that pay well and can't be outsourced. And lower utility costs for families. Congress, let's get it done.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
As I said earlier, when I entered the workforce as a 19-year-old dock worker, union density in this country was about 25% across all industries. The industry that I was in, the LTL, less than truckload industry, 85% unionized. You fast forward to 30 some odd years later, and you're looking at about 6% union density in the private sector, and in the industry that I'm in, about 10%. And what you've seen over that period of time are stagnant and declining wages, disappearing benefits, health, retirement, and worsening working conditions. And I say this all the time. If we're going to reunite this country, if we're going to bring us back together, it's got to be about reunionizing the country. And to do that, we need to build a bold, militant worker movement. And how are we going to do it? Well, my next guest says ambition. And ambition is something we most certainly need. That's why I've asked Hamilton Nolan to come talk with us. He is one of my favorite labor journalists. He's got a great Substack page. how things work. We'll get links out on how social media. I can take a look at that. Hamilton, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, man. Always good to be here.
So I go back to this all the time. When I started working in this country, heavily unionized, about a quarter of the workers were in unions across industries. The one I was in was overwhelmingly unionized. And what we've seen is a destruction of what built that prosperous working class of my grandparents' generation, to where now we got gig work and desperation labor. But we're in a moment, man. There's something that possibly could spark, and you're saying it's all about ambition is how we get it back.
We're definitely in a moment, and everybody in the union world has been talking about this moment that we're in since the pandemic and the conclusion of the pandemic, and how everybody got mad through the pandemic, and the essential workers got energized, and everybody saw the value of organized labor, and everybody saw Starbucks and Amazon, all of these things. Biden administration is labor friendly. We're definitely in a moment, and I'm glad that you talked about union density, because to me, that collapse of union density is like the most important statistic possibly in all of America's, underlying all of our social problems, and it always blows my mind that people don't talk about union density more, especially in the mainstream press, because you can trace all of America's problems since, Ronald Reagan era to that collapse of union density, particularly the rise of inequality, that has led to all the crazy kind of politics we have now. So, when you combine those two things, this collapsing union density that has led to the inequality that is screwing up a lot of things in our politics, and the fact that we are in this moment when public opinion polls say the vast majority of Americans are pro-union now. Tens of millions of workers say they want unions. And then you say, like, what's the missing ingredient here? The missing ingredient is the labor movement itself unionizing all those people, right? Because, the unions aren't going to spontaneously form themselves. So what, people like me and you and others of us in the labor movement are always looking for is, like, where is the energy coming from inside the union world to go out and really start organizing at that large scale and take advantage of this moment before it passes, possibly. And, so I wrote this week, and a lot of people wrote this week about the UAW in particular, made a big announcement that they were planning to organize not just one or two, but every non-union auto company in America.
That should be the goal.
150,000 workers they're targeting. They're like, I actually interviewed Sean Fain right before Thanksgiving, and I said, what is your next organizing target? Is it Tesla? Is it the non-union plants down south? Which
yes,
obviously are a big problem, right? And he was like, I don't care. And I thought he was kind of avoiding the question, but then a week later they came out and they were like, no, we're going for all of it. And it's like such a it's so heartening to see that, because the UAW, I feel like right now more than any other union, are the ones who are going out and saying we are going to attack the scale of this problem. Our solution is going to be as big as the problem is. And
well, in reality, in truth be told, and this is when we went out to Toledo and we went out to Michigan and walked on the picket line with the workers who were striking, those workers knew that this could be one of the last contracts, because as you're looking at automation, as you're looking at changing in technology and changing of products, their days could be numbered. So if they're not going to organize, if they're not going to grab everybody else, if they're not going to reclaim the industry, their days are kind of numbered, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are existential threats, right? Both of those, Tesla, which is a incredibly well-funded, rich, big, growing company that is completely anti-union and is run by the richest guy in the world who is extremely anti-union. That's an existential threat to the power of the UAW. And the fact that every auto worker or every auto company on earth can go and locate plants in southern states and keep unions out is also an existential threat. So both those things are existential threats. And they, what they said was after their strike was successful, they got thousands of incoming leads from other auto workers around the country in all of those places saying, we want to get in. And, as if you've been involved in organizing, like, you really have to grab those organizing opportunities. You can't just let those things float around and not grab them. So
Yeah, it's rare they
I
come
feel
to
like
you.
Right. They're coming to you. They're knocking on the door of the union saying, help us. And like, as a surprising number of unions will let those things die on the vine, man. And it really breaks my heart every time I see that. But that happens way more than it should. But, I feel like what we're seeing UAW is them saying they're rising to the occasion of what the workers are asking for. All those workers want to be able to get those same kind of contracts. And the union for their own part needs it. The union needs those workers. They need to be in those plants if they're going to maintain their power. So it's like, now is the time, man.
But it comes back to something you talked about a moment ago. If you want to solve a lot of our societal problems, I say this all the time. If we're going to change this country, if we're going to reunite this country, if we're going to solve some big problems, I think we have to do it by reorganizing workplaces. Because a lot of issues that we're divided on today, a lot of the outrage candy that's thrown at us by the right, we solved in the workplace years ago. I look at the transgender issue. 30 years ago in my workplace, this was not an issue. We had Ross, who went away, came back as Rosie, and you know who cared? Nobody.
Right.
It was not a huge deal. And it was because Rosie came, did her job, went home, led her life. That was it. And now we're ripped apart because we're no longer finding ground to find common. And I think in the workplace, having a union environment is not just good for the workplace, but it's good for society as a whole.
I mean, I absolutely agree, and there's so, part of it's a cycle that feeds on itself, because as union density has declined, fewer people are involved in unions and fewer people even think about unions, and fewer people tie our problems today to the decline of unions because they don't have any experience of being in unions and seeing how unions can solve a lot of those things.
And the only thing they hear is bad. I mean, that's they've been right. We are now living through 40 years of right-wing messaging into workers' ears, which are unions are job killers. They put companies out of business and they're greedy. Ask any union member what their union means to them, and what it means is better wages, hours, conditions, better opportunities, job security, family security. It means a lot of the things that make our lives better. And right. That message doesn't get told enough, in my view.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's ironic because if you think about the golden era of American prosperity, what people kind of always harken back to, the like post-World War II era, the baby boom era, from 1948 to 1980 or so. That shared prosperity. It was the greatest shared prosperity that this country or any country on earth has ever seen. And what was it that allowed that prosperity to be shared and to create that middle class? Well, it was the strength of labor, that was enabled by strong unions that forced that prosperity to be spread around. And what we've seen since 1980 and since the Reagan era is collapse of unions. There's not enough labor power for workers to keep their share of the gains. All the gains go to the top 1%. And what does it do? It kills the middle class. It makes people cynical. It undermines people's belief in American institutions, and it leads to places like Donald Trump. I mean, I really think that's a really straightforward story that needs to be talked about more in the mainstream media, because I think a lot of people aren't even conscious of what they've lost.
No, I mean, and the thing is, and maybe you'll agree with me, and this was my premise from the very beginning, and the reason in April of 2016 I said Trump was going to win. He tapped into, the racists, the homophobes, the misogynists, all that. Yeah, okay, fine. But what he tapped into was those folks, their memory of what it used to be like when you had those union jobs, when those factories lined Brook Park Avenue in Cleveland, when the Ford and the Chevy plant were pumping out automobiles, and all the feeder plants that had good jobs and union wages were feeding into that. They thought of, he's going to bring that back. And that's what I believe he tapped into more than anything, was he got working people to believe, hey, somebody's going to bring that factory back. Akron's going to bring rubber back. Toledo is going to have glass again. I know people who believed it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I mean, it goes without saying that Donald Trump is a lying scumbag, but it's really cool to see somebody like Sean Fain today, who is who is essentially saying the same thing, right? But actually doing it, and they're coming back and they're reopening plants that got shut down, and they're winning those things in the contracts against the big three, and now they're taking this next step of going out and saying we're going to spread this to everybody because everybody deserves it. Like these are the steps that actually need to happen, not just for the labor movement, but like you said, for America itself to get us out of this 40-year hole.
Yeah.
And
now,
so it's
what I find interesting about your piece, and I hope people will go to your Substack page, howthingswork.substack.com, is you talk about all the other industries. My grandmother worked in a department store. It was unionized.
Yeah.
Everybody, insurance agents, all this stuff. We could be doing more.
Right. Yeah, I mean, UAW is taking advantage of the strength they had coming out of that strike, and they're leveraging that to go do new organizing. And that, again, is a thing that too many unions don't do. And there's so many industries, healthcare, any industry. I mean, my own union, the Writers Guild, I'm in the Writers Guild East, just had obviously a really long strike this summer along with SAG-AFTRA. All of Hollywood was on strike, shut it down, tons of publicity. Won the strike. And now it's like they need to do the same thing that UAW is doing. You need to seize that momentum and go out and take the union to the people that don't have it.
Yep.
Because it's real easy to for those of us who are in the union to sit back and pat ourselves on the back and say we won all this stuff. But you always got to think of society as a whole, right? Like you said, only 10% of people have a union in the first place. Like, what are we doing out here?
No, look, when I was a kid, I saw this growing up. And talked about it earlier. Union job, better life. That was the message. When that neighbor got that job at Ford, their lives got better. Food at the end of the month. Better clothes, better car. Moved out of the projects altogether. Union job, better life. That's the message. Very simple, bumper sticker. Something the right wing knows something about. Maybe we could pick up on. But again, I go back to this idea that it's not just about auto workers. It's not just about truck drivers. It's about people in every industry, from healthcare to education to insurance agents to waiters and waitresses to you name it.
Right.
Every worker should have a contract like every CEO does.
Right. And there, what I try to touch on in my piece too was there's a lot of industries like the auto industry where you have strong unions in the industry already. But you don't have that density, So, for example, the grocery industry, right? UFCW is in the grocery industry. They have hundreds of thousands of grocery workers. They have major grocery companies organized. But if you look at the grocery industry as a whole, it's not like it has 80% union density. It's a minority union density status. And there's not anything really separating that situation from what the UAW has. The UAW has a part of their industry. They're strong in a part of the industry, and now they are affirmatively taking the step to be like, we are going to spread through our industry because we need to have the power in the industry. There's tons of unions that can do that. There's tons of unions that are in the same position essentially that the UAW is in the auto industry. And the only difference that I can tell the UAW is they have the attitude and the leadership that they want to do it,
So let me ask you a last question on that, because since you brought that up, is that leadership or is that membership? Because I keep saying we're in a moment where you've got some militant labor activists where members are demanding more, coming out of the pandemic, being told that they were important, that they were essential, that they were frontline heroes, that their work mattered, only to find out, that was all BS. Right. And now they're ticked about it. So I guess it's a chicken egg thing. But is it as much leadership as it is militancy, or how do you see it?
Yeah, it's obviously both. I mean, you're right, because look, a guy like Sean Fain, who was a reformer who came in and won, he doesn't win without the membership behind him, and they had to go through that process of reforming the union and getting one member, one vote in the union to open up the possibility of having some democratic accountability in that union. I actually just got back from Seattle, where I was reporting a story about UFCW and the reformers inside of UFCW who are trying to start the process of doing the same thing that was done inside UAW, inside the UFCW. And it's a hard process because the unions have all these rules that make it very hard to have democratic accountability and insulates the leadership of the union from the sort of one member, one vote thing that propelled Sean Fain into his seat in the first place. So it's a long process, but just the fact that those things are happening inside other unions goes to show that like the members want that, the members see that, and I guess you could say the leader is the final piece of that chain, you know. But obviously it starts with the members saying, why can't our union do what we wanted to do?
Good stuff, and I agree with your final conclusion. It's time for them to spend money on organizing. It's time to go for broke. I'm right there with you. But Hamilton, I appreciate the time. Great work. Hope folks will check out the Substack page, howthingswork.substack.com. We'll get links out on social media. Hamilton Nolan, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it, man.
Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Unions are making a comeback. More organizing in the last couple of years than in a long time. And the Biden administration being more supportive of unions than any president since FDR. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice as Americans.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we've been talking about, revitalize, reunite, reunionize. That's the secret sauce. And I think this is what Joe Biden's been talking about his entire presidency. How do we make sure that the work that we do is rewarded? And look, I'm thrilled with the things that the Biden administration has done in reshoring manufacturing, promoting people to, well, do what the National Labor Relations Act says should be done. Promote unionism. Get people joining and forming. And as we just talked about with Hamilton Nolan, our history, the history of building the most prosperous working class in history, well, it was all about making unions stronger. Pretty simple stuff. And we can do it. We most certainly can. For our television audience, thanks so much for tuning in. Great having you here. Want to hear from you? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Something I said got you thinking. Maybe you want to join a union. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. For our radio audience, we're right back after this. Stick around.